welcome to Whispers of Ink. I'm Machado de Assis, and now I will read one of my stories.
Let's start with the book Before You Marry, which is part of my novels collection. Chapter 1. Alfredo Tavares was 25, handsome and unmarried. He wasn't rich, but he had a good job and didn't feel the need to climb any higher. He didn't chase wealth or fame, or at least he only chased one thing: to fall deeply in love and then marry wisely. Until that moment, he had never truly fallen for anyone. He had flirted here and there, exchanged a few sweet words and held hands once or twice, but nothing serious ever came of it. What he wanted was something far more intense. He had read books, of course the kind that stirred something inside him. His imagination bloomed because of them, and he started to dream of women like Juliet and Virginia, delicate and noble, full of mystery and charm. He imagined long nights filled with whispered confessions, moonlit walks, and letters sealed with wax and passion. Real life, however, felt dull and uninspiring. He couldn't stand the ordinary. And while it's true that most people live ordinary lives, Alfredo believed that waiting for something magical without ever taking a chance might mean never living at all. But let's be clear, Alfredo didn't really think this through. He didn't reason things out like a scientist or a philosopher. He simply dreamed. He sat by himself in cafes, sipped his tea, and built entire worlds in his head. His favorite place was Carceller, a quiet cafe where he could watch the world go by and imagine something more. Between bites of toast, he created castles in the air, each more beautiful than the last. His dreams were full of music and romance. He pictured himself with a lady from the Middle Ages, singing beneath her balcony, or rowing with her in a gondola under the stars of Venice. But sometimes he dreamed even bigger or smaller depending on his mood. He didn't always want a princess or a noblewoman. Sometimes he imagined a queen like Semiramis, other times a humble girl like Ruth from the Bible. What mattered most was the poetry of it all. He wanted someone beautiful and soft, someone delicate if possible, but above all, someone who could share his dreams. With her, he would live a life more like a dream than reality, beside a quiet lake, between green hills that never changed. For Alfredo, life had to be the solid form of a fantasy. Alfredo Tavares loved beautiful women. Not just admired them, truly adored them. A less careful reader might think this is nothing special. But it's not the same. Most men admire or love women. Alfredo worshipped them like goddesses. He didn't fall to his knees, because his reason told him that would look silly. But even though his body stood straight, his heart knelt in silence. When a beautiful woman passed by, he felt sadder than before. Only when his imagination carried him away again above the city streets and the Carceller shop did he feel some peace. If his dream was to love a woman, then why hadn't he fallen for any of those he admired? Dear reader, none of them had truly touched his heart. His love was artistic, not real like a painting or a song. The bullet that could kill him with love had not yet been cast, or not yet fired. But it wouldn't take much for one of those women to truly capture him. Just a glance, a smile, a small gesture. His imagination would do the rest. But don't think, from what I have said so far, that Alfredo lived only in dreams and fantasies. His friend Dennis used to joke that he was just a traveler of the vast spaces between worlds, as Epicurus might imagine. But that wasn't true. Alfredo didn't live only in his dreams. He also lived in the real world. He traveled little, but he ate, walked, visited places, and yes, to the disappointment of many, he even gained weight. He was well-dressed, a bit plump, and should have been pale and thin, like any true dreamer of his kind. He dressed with care, paid attention to his bills, and sometimes even skipped dinner on nights he went to the theater, all without losing his poetic soul. He wasn't happy, but he didn't refuse the simple things in life. He mixed dreams with routine. That was Alfredo Tavares. Now that you know him, let me tell you what happened to him. From this story you'll see how human events often depend on small random moments. Call it chance or destiny, either way, it still changes lives. Chapter 2. Alfredo walked up Rua do Ouvidor one night, in 1867. It was around 8 o'clock. He felt bored, restless, and wanted to get his mind off things, but he had no desire to talk to anyone. The street was full of life and could be fun, but it was dangerous if you wanted to stay quiet. Alfredo knew this well. When he reached the corner of Rua da Quitanda, he stopped. Should he keep going on Ouvidor or take Quitanda instead? That was the question. He stood there for about 10 minutes, going back and forth in his mind, before finally choosing Rua da Quitanda. He would head toward Rua de San Jose. His plan was simple. He would walk a bit, turn onto Rua da Ayuda, then go through Rua do Paseo. From there, he would turn again onto Rua dos Arcos, continue down Rua do Lavradio until he reached the Rocio Plaza. Then he would go down Rua do Rosario to Direita Street. There, at Carcela's, he would have tea. After that he would go home tired and sleepy. But that was before something unexpected happened. You could call it luck, or maybe fate, depending on how you see the world. It's always strange how we choose one path over another for no real reason. And yet, that simple, random choice became the start of Alfredo Tavares' great story. Ahead, near a shop that stood before the old Mercantile Correo building, there was a carriage stopped on the street. At first, Alfredo didn't notice. He was too caught up in his own thoughts, too wrapped in his own boredom to pay attention to anything else. But then he saw her. A woman stood just a few steps from the shop. She was coming out of the store, dressed all in black. A servant was opening the door of the carriage for her. Alfredo stopped in his tracks. He could have just kept walking and waited for her to get in. That would have been polite. But he didn't move. He couldn't. He was stunned. He stood there, amazed, almost lost in the moment. In the soft light of the street, he saw her profile, a face of perfect beauty, a figure full of grace. Her simple black dress made her skin look even paler, even more delicate. She was elegance itself. And in that moment, everything in Alfredo's life changed. Alfredo stood frozen as the carriage rolled away, his heart pounding like a drum. He wasn't usually the type to lose his composure, but something about that girl had struck him deep. She was elegance itself, graceful, poised, and gone before he could even speak to her. She had walked down the sidewalk with quiet confidence, placed her almost invisible foot on the carriage step, and climbed in with such ease it looked rehearsed. The door shut behind her. The servant climbed onto the cushion at the back, and off they went. Alfredo didn't move until the carriage had already turned the corner. By then, she was gone, but her face remained vivid in his mind. He could still see her eyes, her smile, the way her dress caught the light. He quickened his pace, hoping to catch sight of the carriage again, but by the time he reached the corner of Rua da Assembleia, the carriage was already heading up the street. Luck was on his side. A handsome cab came up behind him, empty. Without thinking, he jumped in and told the driver to follow the carriage. This was the kind of moment he'd read about in novels, chasing after a beautiful stranger, letting fate guide his steps. It wasn't every day something like this happened, and Alfredo couldn't help but feel this was the start of something extraordinary. He imagined her life. She must be someone special, perhaps a lost Lilia or a modern-day Heloise, hidden in plain sight among the elite of Rio de Janeiro. And he would be her Abelard, devoted and passionate, ready to follow her anywhere. As the handsome cab rolled forward, he imagined entire chapters unfolding in his head. He was already writing the story in his mind, how they would meet again, how she would smile at him, how they would fall in love. The carriage came to a stop in front of a house on Rua de Matacavalos, now known as Riachuelo. The hansom stopped a few feet behind. Moments later, the girl stepped out and walked into the house. It was a modest but well-kept home, clearly belonging to a family of some means. The carriage turned back the way it had come, moving slowly. The hansom followed at the same pace. Alfredo made a mental note of the address and returned to his thoughts. Who was she? What was her name? What kind of life did she lead? The driver, who had been silent the whole ride, finally broke the quiet. You were taken by that young lady, weren't you? He said, smirking. She's a beauty, no doubt. I suppose so, Alfredo replied, still distracted. I only saw her for a moment. Does she live here? She does. Oh. So you've driven her here before? Twice, the driver said. Nice family. Quiet folks. Alfredo leaned back, his mind racing. This was only the beginning. Alfredo tapped his fingers against the side of the carriage, thinking. The driver blew a puff of smoke into the cool evening air. She's a widow, the driver said suddenly. Are you sure? Alfredo asked. I am, sir. Saw it with my own eyes. Where did I leave my cigar? Alfredo muttered, more to himself than the driver. Here, the driver said, pulling a fresh Havana from his coat. Try this one. Alfredo nodded, lit the cigar, and handed the box back. The driver took it with a small nod of thanks. That young lady, the driver continued, is a widow. And not just any widow. She lives well, dresses well, and plenty of men try their luck with her. But she doesn't seem to want another husband. How do you know all this? Alfredo asked. I live just down Rua, do Resende. Didn't you see how my horse almost turned too fast back there? Alfredo stayed quiet for a moment, watching the streetlights flicker as they passed. Does she live alone? He finally asked. No, not exactly, the driver said. She lives with her untold woman and a younger sister. Only them? There's a cousin too. Is he young? 30-something. Is he married? Widower. Alfredo thought to himself. This cousin, he decided, was an unnecessary piece on the board. He could be a problem. What if he was in love with her? That wouldn't be strange. A man in his 30s, still alive to passion, and a cousin like that? A beautiful woman, like a modern-day Eve. Temptation itself. Alfredo already imagined the man as a rival, even though he hadn't met him. The driver gave more details. There were small gatherings at her house once a month or so. Only a few close friends came. Her name, he said, was Angela. She had some money of her own and would inherit even more from the old aunt, who wasn't long for this world. Alfredo listened carefully, storing every word. The name Angela settled deep in his chest, like a secret. He asked for the number of the carriage, the stable's address, and the place where the driver usually waited. Then he told him to turn back. As they passed her house, Alfredo glanced toward the window. The room was lit, but he saw no one inside, no sign of her. He leaned back, eyes closed, and the carriage sped off into the night. Chapter 3. Alfredo felt good about himself and his life. Fortune had handed him something amazing, this woman he saw by chance, and the moment he saw her, he decided to follow her. Everything went his way. He found out where she lived. He learned she was single. And more than anything else, he was falling in love. Yes, he was in love. That first night, his mind was completely filled with the memory of her fleeting presence. While she might have been sleeping quietly in her lonely room, Alfredo stayed awake, dreaming of a future with her. He imagined 1,000 things, moments they hadn't lived yet, conversations they hadn't had, a life together. He built castles in the air, just like an artist painting his first masterpiece, full of hope and excitement. It never crossed his mind that Angela could be an ordinary woman. No way. A woman so beautiful had to be extraordinary inside, too. She couldn't just be smart, she had to have a delicate, poetic soul, full of dreams and ideas like his own. After all, why would nature go through so much trouble to make her so perfect on the outside, if not to match her beauty within? Thinking like this, Alfredo passed the night. The sky began to turn light with the first signs of dawn, and still he hadn't slept. But sleep was necessary, and eventually he gave in. When he woke up, the sun was already high. And the first thing he thought of was Her Angela. He thought of her while he had breakfast. He thought of her while he worked. He thought of her again at dinner, sitting alone at the hotel table. This was the first time he had ever felt so deeply moved. There was no doubt about it, this was it. His moment had come. In the afternoon he went back to Matacavalos. No one was at the window. He walked past the house 3 or 4 times but saw no sign of her. Alfredo was naturally impatient and dramatic. This first small setback made him grumpy and anxious. That night was even harder than the one before. But the next afternoon brought some comfort. As he approached the house, he saw a woman standing at the window. There she was. Alfredo could hardly believe it. Even if his eyes hadn't told him, his heart did. This was her, the one and only, Angela. He walked on the opposite side of the street, his gaze fixed on the young woman. His eyes were full of love, so full that if she had looked into them, she would have seen everything he felt. But she didn't notice. Either someone called her from inside the house or she had grown tired of standing at the window, and she went inside quickly, not even seeing our hero. But Alfredo wasn't sad. Not at all. He had seen her again. He had once more confirmed that she was truly beautiful, more than he remembered. His heart felt even more tied to her than before. That was what mattered. As for the rest, he would need time and a bit of luck. It was only natural that he began to walk by her house more often. Sometimes she was there by the window. Sometimes she wasn't. After 8 full days, she still hadn't noticed him. But on the 9th day she did. She wasn't surprised when she saw him looking at her from far away after all. That's what all the young men who passed by did. But the way he looked at her, that was different. It caught her attention. Still, she looked away. It wouldn't be proper to pay attention to a stranger. But not long after, she peeked again. And this time, he hadn't looked away. When she realized he was still staring, she stepped back quickly. Alfredo sighed. And that sigh had 2 meanings. The first was a tribute from his heart, a sign of love. The second was a sigh of discouragement. He could now see clearly that her heart hadn't fallen for him at first sight, as he had hoped. But he didn't give up. Soon enough, he thought, things could get better with time. And he also understood that it was only natural for her to act carefully. After all, she couldn't seem too eager or fall easily for the affection she must have seen in his eyes. 4 days later, she saw him again. This time, she seemed to recognize him. And faster than the first time, she left the window. Alfredo felt his heart sink. Alfredo stood there, whispering a sad monologue to himself, his voice low and trembling. He blamed fate and nature for not making hearts match each other when love was involved. He wished people were born in pairs, like souls tied together, meant to find each other in this world. It sounded like a perfect system, especially now that he had fallen for a beautiful widow. But if he had fallen for an old, toothless, tobacco-chewing woman, the same system would have seemed terrible. That's just how the world worked. 5 or 6 weeks passed like this. Sometimes he saw her, and she avoided him. Other times he didn't see her at all, and those were the worst nights long. Sleepless hours filled with longing. One day, he was in a store on Rua do Ouvidor, or maybe it was Rua dos Arrives. He couldn't remember exactly when he saw her walk in. She was with her younger sister. His heart jumped. Angela looked at him. If she recognized him, she didn't show it. Her face stayed calm, like a mirror without reflection. Another time, at a funeral mass in La Paz, he saw her again, the same beautiful distant figure. But when she looked at him, it was like she was looking at stone. Not a muscle in her face moved. Alfredo didn't have close friends to talk to about these feelings. But his heart was full, and he needed to share it with someone. He turned to Tiburcio, a man he used to walk with, though they hadn't spent much time together since the incident on Rua da Quitanda. Tiburcio was thin and pale, almost yellow. He could have looked decent if he dressed normally, but instead, he tried too hard to be different. He wore his clothes in a strange way that made him look ridiculous. He claimed to hate all decent women, and was always surrounded by those who weren't. Alfredo knew this, but he also saw some good in Tiburcio. He trusted him, more or less, and decided to tell him everything. Tiburcio listened, clearly flattered that Alfredo had chosen him. "So, is she really beautiful?" Tiburcio asked. "Oh, I don't even know how to describe her," Alfredo replied. "But is she rich?" Tiburcio asked again, his eyes narrowing. Alfredo sighed and looked away. "I don't know if she truly loves someone else. All I know is that, for now, everything feels pointless. Maybe she's in love with her cousin or someone else, and maybe they're even getting married. What I'm sure of is that I feel worse every day." Tiburcio nodded slowly, as if he had expected this. "I can imagine," he said. Alfredo turned to him. "What would you do in my place?" "I'd keep trying," Tiburcio replied. "But what if it doesn't work?" Alfredo asked. "Then keep trying anyway," Tiburcio said. "Have you already sent her a letter?" "Oh no!" Alfredo shook his head. Tiburcio thought for a moment. "You're right," he finally said. "It would be inappropriate. I don't know what to tell you. I've never sailed in these waters before. I've only ever known others' waters where the routes are clear, and the compass is familiar to everyone." Alfredo, who hadn't really been listening, spoke next. "If I could just forget her, I'd have stopped this already. Sometimes I feel like a fool, because let's face it, she lives in a completely different world." Tiburcio looked serious. "Love has a way of closing the distance," he said wisely. "Do you really think so?" Alfredo asked. "I do," Tiburcio replied. "And I think you should keep going as you are now. But if, in a few weeks, nothing has changed, come back to me. I'll think of something useful to suggest." Alfredo squeezed his friend's hands with emotion. "Still," Tiburcio went on, "maybe it would help if I could see her myself. Since I'm not in love with her like you are, I might understand her better. I could tell if she's cold or simply proud. That might explain why she's still avoiding you." Alfredo made a face, though he tried to hide it. The idea didn't sit well with him. He didn't want to visit Angela with someone else by his side. That would take away the romantic sadness of his quiet, lonely suffering. Still, he couldn't say no to a friend who cared so much. They agreed to go together that same afternoon to Matacavalos. Then, suddenly, Alfredo had an idea. His face lit up. "You know what? I think it's better if we don't arrive together. You go first and I'll follow a little later." "Fine by me," Tiburcio said. "But will she be at the window today?" "I think so. For the last 5 days, I've seen her there every day." "Oh, that's already a good sign." "But she never looks at me." Tiburcio crossed his arms and gave a slow, skeptical shake of his head. "Dissimulation," he said, his voice firm. "That angel?" "I don't believe in angels," Tiburcio replied in a thoughtful tone. "Not here on earth, at least. The most I can accept is the idea that they might exist in heaven. But even that is just a vague hypothesis." Chapter 4. That same afternoon, the two of them headed to Matacavalos, just as they had planned. On Angela was at the window, accompanied by her elderly aunt, and her youngest sister. She saw her boyfriend from far away, but didn't look directly at him. Tiburcio, on the other hand, couldn't take his eyes off the beautiful young woman. Alfredo passed by, as always. The two friends met again once they were far enough away from the lady's view. Tiburcio praised the young woman's beauty, and Alfredo listened with joy, as if someone were complimenting him on a painting he had created himself. "Oh, I will be so happy," he said, caught up in a wave of excitement. "Yes," Tiburcio agreed. "I believe you will be happy." "What should I do?" Alfredo asked. "Keep fighting for a few more days, say, about 15, and then write a letter." "I'd already thought about that," Alfredo replied. "But I was afraid I might make a mistake. I needed someone else's opinion. A letter like that with no real hope behind it is unusual. That's exactly what makes it exciting. But how should I send it?" "That part is up to you," Tiburcio said. "See if you can find a way to talk to one of the servants in the house, or the coachman from the carriage," Alfredo Tavares exclaimed proudly. Tiburcio looked completely stunned when he heard Alfredo say that. But Alfredo didn't stop to explain that this coachman was already somewhat involved in the matter. Tiburcio approved of the idea. It was settled. The coachman would be the one to deliver the letter. The days passed without anything important happening. Well, almost. There was one important moment. One afternoon, Alfredo was walking below Angela's windows. She wasn't looking at him. Suddenly, he heard a soft cry and saw something small fly past his eye as something that looked like a little ribbon bough. It was, in fact, a ribbon bough that had fallen to the ground. Alfredo looked up, but Angela was no longer there. He looked around, bent down, picked up the bough, and carefully put it into his pocket. Alfredo stood on the street corner, heart pounding like a drum. He couldn't quite explain what he felt inside. It was too big, too bright, too confusing. If someone asked him to describe it, they'd need hours and maybe even an artist's brush to get it right. All he knew was that he wanted to kiss the blue ribbon right there in the open street. To him, it wasn't just a ribbon anymore. It was part of her, part of Angela. He stopped himself, though. He walked to the end of the street and turned back. He looked up at her window, hoping to see her standing there. But she wasn't. She hadn't come out all day, and that was strange. Lately, she always seemed to appear when he passed by. Now nothing. He tried to tell himself it meant nothing. Maybe the ribbon had just slipped off by accident. But then again, maybe she was hiding. Maybe she was embarrassed after what had happened. After all, dropping a ribbon on purpose, wasn't that a kind of message? And if she had meant it, then why wasn't she showing herself now? Maybe, he whispered to himself. But a moment later, he shook his head. No, it can't be real. That kind of luck doesn't happen to someone like me. She probably didn't even mean it. Still, he'll love this ribbon just the same. When he got home, he carefully took the ribbon from his pocket. It was light blue, soft to the touch. It had probably been in her hair or pinned to her dress. He kissed it again and again, 25 times, maybe more. If he had been a poet, he might have written the poem right then. He could have said the ribbon held a piece of her soul, or that its color matched the sky on a perfect morning. But Alfredo wasn't a poet. He was just a man in love. So he kissed the ribbon one last time, and then went to find his friend. "I think it's time," his friend said. "Write her the letter." "I think so too." "Don't be shy. I'll do it tomorrow." But Alfredo didn't know how quickly things could change. The next day, he went to find the carriage driver who had helped him so many times before. He needed someone to deliver the letter, someone discreet. But when he arrived, the driver was gone, not out, not busy. Dead. Gone forever. Alfredo stared at the empty stable. The driver had been healthy the night before. There had been no warning. And now, everything had changed. The plan, the timing, the hope all gone with the wind. Alfredo threw his hands up in frustration. "This is too much," he said out loud. "It feels like fate itself is trying to stop me at every turn." He shook his head and muttered, "I bet this man wouldn't have died if I didn't need him so badly. It's like destiny is hunting me down." But then he stood straighter and said firmly, "Still, I won't give up. No, not at all." With that strong decision, the young lover went looking for another way to reach his goal. And luck, it seemed, finally smiled on him. A house became available right next to Angela's. It was small, but stylish, perfect for one or two single men. Alfredo wasted no time and rented it. He rushed to tell his friend, full of excitement. "I did it," he announced proudly. His friend clapped his hands together. "You did the right thing. That's a smart move. If you're living right next door, there's no way you won't make some progress." Alfredo nodded. "Even better, she already knows me. She'll see this as proof of my love." "Exactly," the friend replied. Alfredo didn't wait long to move in. 2 days later, he was already in his new home. And, of course, the blue ribbon didn't end up in a drawer or a little box. He kept it close, right in his pocket. Chapter 5. Alfredo couldn't believe his luck when he found out that both he and Angela had back gardens. It felt like a gift from the sky. There's no way, he thought, that a girl so full of poetry wouldn't love to walk in her garden. He imagined seeing her from his back window, or even better, catching a glimpse over the fence if it wasn't too high. Would that really happen? He went outside to check the fence and found it only came up to his chest. "Perfect," he said out loud. It couldn't have been planned better. He silently thanked fate, which he had cursed just days before, and went back upstairs to organize his things and give some instructions to his servant. Later that afternoon, while standing at the window, he saw her. Angela looked at him as if she wasn't sure what she was seeing. But once she realized it was really him, she acted like he didn't matter at all. Alfredo had planned to greet her politely, using their neighborly connection as an excuse. But the moment passed, and he forgot all about being formal. He tried again and again to find the right time, but Angela seemed completely unaware of him. That's okay, he told himself. The most important thing is that I am right here, close to her. Now that he could see her better, she looked even more beautiful than before. Her beauty, he realized, only grew the more you looked at her. He admitted to himself that it was totally impossible to think of any other woman in the world even if this one might bring him pain. On the second day, things went better. He came to the window just as Angela and her aunt were looking out theirs. He politely greeted them, and they responded with a small nod. That was the start of their acquaintance. Still, the romance didn't move forward. All afternoon their eyes didn't meet, and Angela seemed to have completely forgotten he existed. 8 days later, Alfredo was again at his window when he saw Angela coming alone, holding a flower in her hand. She looked directly at him, and they both greeted each other. That was the first real moment he had with her. His heart soared. He felt like he was floating in heaven. Alfredo watched as the young woman leaned against the railing, twirling a flower between her fingers. She looked distracted, but he couldn't tell if she was playing with the flower just for fun or trying to show off her delicate hand. Either way, he couldn't take his eyes off it. That hand, he thought, was every bit as graceful as the foot he had glimpsed weeks ago on Quitanda Street. He was completely enchanted. But what really shook him happened next. As she turned to leave the window, she looked at him again. Her lips didn't show any strictness or coldness this time, in fact. Alfredo could swear he saw the faintest hint of a smile. "I'm happy," he exclaimed as he walked into his room. "Finally, I've made some progress." He paced the room, excited and unable to stay still, even pausing to look at himself in the mirror. He was glowing, lost in his own joy. 10 minutes later, he went back to the window. 10 minutes after that, Angela appeared. They looked at each other once more. That was the third time that afternoon after weeks of total indifference. That night, Alfredo couldn't sleep at all. In his mind, he was already planning to propose in 2 months' time. The next day, he didn't see her, and he became deeply upset. Luckily, his servant, who had noticed the boy's growing obsession, managed to tell him that the neighbors had left early that morning and hadn't returned. Had they moved away? The thought kept Alfredo awake all night, filled with worry. The next day, he could barely focus on work. He ate quickly and hurried back home. To his relief, Angela was back at the window. When Alfredo appeared at his own window and greeted her, he noticed she was holding another flower, a daisy. He stood there, completely absorbed, watching her. Angela began to pluck the petals one by one, like someone trying to decide something important about the heart. Alfredo couldn't wait any longer. He ran to a small hidden drawer, pulled out a blue ribbon, and came back to the window holding it. Angela had finished plucking the last petal. She looked at him and saw the little bough in his hand, the same one that had fallen from her hair earlier. She trembled slightly and smiled. From that moment on, the reader can imagine that things were bound to move forward. Alfredo saw her one day in the garden, sitting inside a vine-covered arbor. This time, his greeting came with a smile from her. The next day, she wasn't in the arbor anymore, she was walking around. Another smile, and 3 or 4 glances. Alfredo took a chance and wrote his first letter. The letter burned with passion. It spoke of heaven, of an angel, of a life filled with poetry and love. He offered to die at her feet if that was what it took. Her reply came quickly. It was less intense. In fact, there was no real fire in it. But there was sympathie, plenty of it mixed in with a few doubts and fears. Her words were carefully chosen, just enough to awaken the pride of a heart melting away in feeling. So began a letter exchange that lasted about a month before they finally met in person. They met by the garden fence, at night, not long after evening prayers. Alfredo had sent his servant to his friend and confidante Burcio with a note asking him to hold the messenger until 8 o'clock or later. It's worth noting that this meeting wasn't really necessary. Angela was a free woman. She could choose a second husband without any pressure. She had no reason to hide her feelings. And for Alfredo, it wouldn't have been hard to arrange a proper introduction at her home, if he had wanted to take that first step before asking for her hand in marriage. Still, Alfredo insisted on the secret garden meeting, and at first she refused. It fit into his poetic idea of Loveit was a soft echo of a scene from Shakespeare. Chapter 6. Alfredo looked deep into her eyes, his voice trembling with emotion. "So you promise that you love me?" "I promise," she replied softly. "Till death?" "Till death." "I love you too, my dear Angela. Not just today, but for a long time now, even though you ignored me." "Oh. Well, not ignored me, exactly," he corrected himself. "More like treated me with indifference." He paused, his voice growing stronger. "But all that is in the past now. We are two hearts united forever." "Forever," she echoed. Suddenly, a sound came from inside Angela's house. "What was that?" Alfredo asked, startled. Angela tried to pull away. "Don't run," he said, holding her hand tighter. "But, oh, it's nothing. Probably just one of the servants. What if someone sees me here with you? Are you afraid?" "No, I'm ashamed." The night hid the pale fear on Alfredo's face. "Shame," he said, surprised. "Shame to love me?" "That's not what I said," she replied quickly. "I'm ashamed, because if someone finds us here, they'll talk. They'll say things about me, when there's nothing wrong with what we're doing." He understood her point. Still, he ran a hand through his hair in a dramatic gesture of pain, one hidden by the darkness from her sight. "Listen," he said after a moment. "The best thing is for you to come to my house. I give you permission to ask for my hand in marriage." Even though she had hinted at this in their letters, it was the first time she said it so clearly. Alfredo felt like he had been lifted to heaven. He thanked her and gently kissed her hand. "Well then, goodbye," she whispered. "Not yet," he said, holding her back. "That's too risky. Just one more moment." "Can't you hear that noise?" she said, turning her ear toward the house again. He answered with the words of a poet lost in love. "It's not the lark you hear, but the nightingale." "No," she said plainly. "That's my aunt's voice." "Goodbye." "One last thing," he asked. "Before I go to your house, I want one more meeting right here." "Alfredo!" "One more, and the last." She didn't answer right away. "Please," he begged. "I don't know goodbye." With that, she pulled her hand free from his and ran back to the house. Alfredo stayed behind, sad and happy all at once. Alfredo had heard Angela's sweet voice, held her soft, pale hand smooth as velvet, and listened as she swore she loved him. He felt ready to ask for her hand in marriage, officially, and with great ceremony. But her concern about what her aunt might think struck him as surprisingly ordinary. He wanted to see her completely lost in poetry, consumed by love, unaware of anything else in the world, as if her heart beat for him and him alone. The goodbye especially felt too sudden. Her farewell was more like escape than affection. She didn't say goodbye, she ran away. Yet, even that sudden fear in her eyes was dramatic, almost fascinating. So why not grant him another meeting? As he turned these thoughts over in his mind, Angela sat thinking about the impression she might have left and the hurt she may have caused by refusing a second, final meeting. She thought for a long time and decided she had to fix things, if that's even what it was. The next morning, early enough that the dew still clung to the windows, Alfredo received a small note from his beloved. It was a declaration of love. She explained why she had left so quickly the night before, and promised another meeting that very night. After that, he would officially ask for her hand. Alfredo was overjoyed. That day, the world seemed brighter. The sun shone a little warmer. Even his lunch tasted amazing, although the fillet was as tough as shoe leather, and the tea was cold as ice water. His boss seemed unusually kind. Everyone he passed on the street looked like a dear friend. Even his servant benefited from his joy. Alfredo gave him a generous tip for doing a decent job brushing his boots, which, to be honest, didn't even need polish. The meeting took place without any problems. They exchanged the usual declarations. I love you so much. And I love you. You're an angel. Well, be happy. May God hear us. He will hear us. These words, and more, filled the half-hour meeting like a song on repeat. Alfredo couldn't stop smiling as he walked into the hotel the next morning. He had just spent the most magical evening of his life, and his heart still raced with the thrill of it all. Everything had fallen into place. He had found her, the woman he had dreamed of for so long, the one who seemed to understand him without him needing to explain a thing. She had listened to him with such attention, such warmth, that he felt like he was floating on air. He told Tiburcio everything. His friend, still chewing a piece of bread, looked up with genuine surprise. You look like a man who's just won the lottery, Tiburcio said, setting his fork down. I have won something better, Alfredo replied, his eyes shining. I found her. I'm in love. Tiburcio raised an eyebrow but smiled. So it's serious this time? More than serious, Alfredo said. She's everything I've ever wanted. Not just beautiful, though she's beautiful, but kind, intelligent, and I don't know how to explain it. She feels things the way I do. Tiburcio gave a small nod. And she feels the same about you? She does, Alfredo said confidently. We're going to get married. Already? Tiburcio asked, almost choking on his coffee. Soon. 3 or 4 months, maybe less. Shall decide. Tiburcio wiped his mouth and leaned back in his chair. You're moving fast, my friend. Alfredo waved a hand. Why wait? We both know what we want. Tiburcio chuckled. Before you plan the wedding, maybe finish your steak first. Alfredo frowned. That's not funny. I'm just teasing, Tiburcio said, raising his hands in surrender. But I'm happy for you. Really? Alfredo relaxed and smiled again. Thanks. You've always been there for me, even when I didn't deserve it. So, when are you going to ask her officially? Tiburcio asked. Tomorrow, Alfredo said, standing up. You'll go see her tomorrow. Tiburcio gave him a firm look. Then go with courage. And with that, Alfredo left the hotel with the world at his feet, ready to take the next step into the future he had imagined for so long. Chapter 7. Alfredo Tavares was a man with many stories, but I won't burden the reader with all of them. So far, it was necessary to tell some and summarize others. Now that the courtship has ended and the engagement period begins, I don't want to tire the reader with a story that has no surprises. Exactly 3 months after their second meeting, the couple got married in the church of Lapa. Only a few close friends and family attended. Among them was Alfredo's best friend, one of the groomsmen. The other groomsman was Angela's cousin, the same man the carriage driver had mentioned earlier. He didn't appear before now because there was no need. His name was Epaminondas, and he always managed to prove wrong the priest who gave him that name, telling jokes at every chance he got. It's not important now, so I won't say more about it. After the wedding, the newlyweds went on their honeymoon to Tijuca. Alfredo chose a house there that suited both the moment and his poetic nature. They stayed away from the city for a whole month. On the 31st day, Angela saw an advertisement for a new play at the Ginasio Theater. She told Alfredo she wanted to go back to town to watch it. Alfredo replied that no comedy in the world could match the scent of the blooming orange trees or the soft sound of water flowing in the garden pool. Angela shrugged and looked upset. "What's wrong, my love?" Alfredo asked her 20 minutes later. She gave him a look full of pity, stood up, and walked into her bedroom. Alfredo had only 2 options now. First, scratch his head in confusion. Second, take his wife to the theater. And so, he gave in to both. When he told Angela they would go to the play, she welcomed him with joy. "Even so," Alfredo added, "even so, I feel a little sad. We have had such a beautiful 30 days. We can come back next year," she said. "Next year?" "Yes, we can rent another house. But what about this one? This one is done." Alfredo looked out the window, his thoughts heavy. "So, you wanted to live in exile?" he asked, breaking the silence. "I thought it was paradise," he replied, his voice tinged with sadness. "Paradise is something from novels," Angela said coolly. Her words hit Alfredo like a punch to the gut. He didn't speak, but Angela saw the pain in his eyes. Wanting to soften the blow, she leaned closer and said something sweet. It wasn't much, but it helped calm him a little. "Listen, Angela," he finally said. "To me, marriage has always meant 2 people in love living a quiet, shared solitude. Will we be like that?" "Why not?" she asked. "Do you promise?" "That we'll be happy," she replied, her tone light and vague. Her answer was flexible, almost playful. But Alfredo took it seriously. He hugged her tightly, hoping that the moment would last. That same evening, they moved into his aunt's house and went to the theater. The new play at the Ginasio Theater bored Alfredo completely, but Angela loved it. She was radiant, her eyes shining with excitement. When the final curtain fell, she turned to him and said, "We must come again." "Did you really like it?" he asked. I loved it. And you? I didn't, Alfredo said, clearly annoyed. Angela shrugged, as if to say, whether you like it or not, we'll be back. And they were. That was just the beginning of what seemed like an endless whirlwind. Angela was a storm always moving, always going somewhere. Life for her was outside the house. Inside there was only boredom, which she called death. She never missed a ball, a show, or a party. She filled her days with events and her closet with fine clothes lace, jewels, silk. She bought them every day like there was no end to her money. Alfredo tried to pull her into his world of romantic dreams, but it was like talking to a wall. She always answered with a shrug. He hated balls the most, especially the ones held at their own home, because that's when he felt furthest from her. When he tried to talk to her about it, she'd say, "These are just social duties. If I wanted to live quietly, I'd have become a nun and joined a convent." But not all of them, he would reply, trying to reason with her. Alfredo sighed, shaking his head. Not everyone knows their duties. Oh, the lonely life, Angela. The life for two. Life isn't a chess game. Or a camp. What do you mean by that? Nothing. You seem foolish. Angela. Come on. She would shrug and leave him alone. Alfredo always ended up being the first to ask for peace. The influence she had on him was total. All the strength was on her side. He was, quite literally, the servant of the house. At the balls they attended, his torment was not only great in itself, but made worse by the compliments people gave to his wife. There's Angela, someone would say. Who is she? That one in the blue dress. The one who got married? She got married? Oh yes, she did. To whom? To a nice, kind young man. What a lucky man. Where is the husband? Shh. Here he is, that gloomy man fixing his tie. These and other comments filled Alfredo with anger. He realized that people only knew him because of her. His own person was like a zero. She was the real value. There was no way to go home early. When Angela entered a ball, she only left with the last guests. She fit perfectly the words her husband once said in a bad mood. You squeeze a ball until the very last drop. Sometimes, Alfredo would be at home, resting and happily chatting with her, letting his imagination run wild. But Angela, either out of boredom or an unstoppable urge to go out, would go to her room, get dressed, and invite her husband to leave with her. At first, he no longer resisted. He would sigh deeply and get dressed too. He would return from these outings tired and upset, while she was cheerful. And often, she had also bought herself a new, expensive dress, a piece of jewelry, or some other fancy item. Alfredo had no strength to fight back. The smallest wish from Angela became a law of iron for him. He obeyed not just out of love, but out of weakness. In this situation, Alfredo felt the need to talk to someone. Alfredo waited, but no one came. Talking to Tiburcio wasn't an option. He didn't want to share his marital troubles with someone. Even a friend who was still in the end, an outsider Angela's aunt meanwhile, seemed to side with her niece in every way. Frustrated and unsure of his next move, Alfredo thought of asking Epaminondas for advice. Chapter 8. Alfredo poured out his complaints to his cousin Epaminondas, who listened carefully. Deep down, Epaminondas thought the complaints were overblown. Actually, they were completely ridiculous. Still, he chose to be polite. "What you want is impossible," he said. "Impossible?" Alfredo repeated, surprised. "Absolutely. Your wife is young. Of course she wants to have fun. Why should she live like a nun?" "That's not what I'm asking," Alfredo replied. "I just want her to stay home more, to seem less bored when we're alone together. Remember what happened on Sunday?" "I remember," Epaminondas said. "You wanted to read her some poetry, and she told you not to bother her." "Exactly. What do you think about that?" Epaminondas didn't answer right away. He stayed quiet, letting the silence speak for him. Alfredo stayed silent too, for a while. Then he said, "I've made up my mind. I'm going to use my authority as a husband." "Don't go down that road," Epaminondas warned. "But how long can I keep living like this?" "Well, forever is out of the question," Epaminondas said with a smile. "But think carefully. There's danger here. I had a cousin once who tried to control his wife like that. You won't believe what she did. She cut off her own little toe left foot and cooked it with potatoes. Then she served it to him." "You're joking." "I'm not." Her name was Lucia. When he realized he had actually eaten part of his own wife, he had a heart attack. I can imagine. 2 days later, he died from guilt. Don't try that. Never push a woman too far. Give things time. As she gets older, she'll calm down. That's just how it goes. Alfredo threw up his hands in frustration. "Calm down," Epaminondas said. "I used to be just like you. My late wife, she was the same way." "You mean she also liked to have fun?" "Exactly the same. I tried to fight it. It almost killed me." "Really?" "There's a big scar between my ribs to prove it. She stabbed me with a knife while I was sleeping peacefully." "No way." "True story. I barely had time to grab her wrist and push her away. The bedroom door was locked, but I shoved it so hard that it flew open, and she ended up across the living room." Alfredo remembered just in time about his cousin's strange temper, and decided to let him speak freely. Epaminondas immediately began dreaming up 1 or 2 chapters of a dark, bloody novel right there. Alfredo, feeling annoyed, walked away and left him alone. Tiburcio saw Alfredo a few times looking sad and quiet. He tried to find out what was wrong, but Alfredo stayed wisely silent. Alfredo's wife gave herself full freedom to follow her own whims. She began hosting parties every week, even though her husband strongly disagreed. In the middle of his sadness, he once shouted, "But then I don't have a wife. I have a locomotive." Angela heard this and smiled, but gave him no kind of reply at all. The young woman had only a small amount of money, but her spending was huge. With all the things she bought and paid for, it was impossible for the money to last forever. After 5 years, Alfredo finally understood that everything was ruined. His wife felt deep pain when he told her the truth. "I really feel this," Alfredo added. "But my conscience is calm. I always tried to stop while spending." "Always." "Not always, because I loved you and still love you. It hurt me to see you sad. But most of the time, I did fight against it with all my strength. And now? Now we must be careful with money. We must live like poor people." Angela lowered her head. Then came a long silence. She was the first to break it. "That's impossible." "Impossible? What do you mean?" "Poverty. I can't live like that. It's impossible." "Yes," Alfredo said with thoughtful sadness, "but it's necessary." "No, it's not necessary. I will find a way. I have friends who can help. Or maybe a mine full of gold." Angela didn't say anything else. Alfredo went to the business he had started, not entirely unhappy with how things were going. "I'm not happy," he thought, "but at least my marriage might finally change." The next 4 days passed without anything unusual. But there was something unusual. Angela began acting much more loving toward her husband than she had ever been before. Alfredo believed that his good fortune came from the current situation, and he felt grateful to whatever lucky star had brought him such success. On the 5th day, Epaminondas came to talk to Alfredo, and suggested they ask the government for a mining concession and privilege in Mato Grosso. "But I'm not getting involved in mining operations," Alfredo said at first. "Pardon me," Epaminondas replied. "We don't need to mine. We can sell the privilege." "Are you sure about that?" Alfredo asked, now curious. "Absolutely sure," Epaminondas said confidently. Then he added, "We also have another opportunity. A railway project in Piauí. We can sell that company the same way. Do you have the right connections for both?" "I do," he answered without hesitation. Alfredo thought it over for a moment. "I'm in," he said finally. Epaminondas promised he could get both deals approved by the minister. He talked so enthusiastically that Alfredo, who knew how often his cousin exaggerated or made things up, began to feel suspicious. But this time, he was wrong. For once, Epaminondas was telling the truth. He really did have the means to secure both projects. Angela didn't ask her husband why he seemed distracted when he came home that day. Alfredo had decided not to tell her anything yet, at least not yet. He trusted that his efforts would lead to something better, and he hoped to guide her toward that future without causing worry. The paperwork moved forward with surprising speed, much faster than usual. It felt like a kind fairy was helping push things along. Alfredo knew the minister personally. He had been invited to tea at the minister's house twice, and had even had the honor of hosting him at his own home a few times. Even so, he didn't expect special treatment or a quick approval. But the process moved faster than a locomotive. Less than 2 months had passed since the proposal was submitted when Alfredo walked into his house and was greeted by a flurry of hugs and kisses from his wife. "What's going on?" he asked, smiling. "I have a present for you," she said. "A present? What day is today?" "March 25th. That's your birthday." I hadn't even remembered. "Well, here is my gift." It was a piece of paper. Alfredo opened it carefully. It was the official decree granting him the mining privilege. Alfredo stood there, completely stunned. His mouth hung open, and his eyes darted back and forth as if trying to make sense of what had just happened. But how did this happen? He finally managed to ask. "I wanted to surprise you," she said with a soft smile. "The other decree will come in 8 days. So you knew that I knew everything. Who told you?" Angela hesitated for a moment. Her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of her skirt, and her eyes flickered to the side. It was my cousin Epaminondas." That explanation was enough for Alfredo for 3 whole days. On the morning of the 4th day, he picked up the newspaper and began to read. His eyes scanned the headlines absent-mindedly until one line caught his attention. Then he read it again, more slowly this time. His face turned pale. "Mina de Caroso," he whispered to himself. "So now the public treasury is used to warm the hearts of ministers? The one who asks wants to know." A sharp wave of anger surged through him. Without thinking, he tore the paper in half, then again and again, until nothing remained but torn pieces scattered across the floor. After that, he just stood there, silent, staring at nothing. Chapter 9. Tiburcio watched Alfredo closely, noting the way his friend's eyes avoided his, and how his fingers tapped nervously against the wooden table. Finally, he asked, "So what's wrong? What is it that you're not saying?" Alfredo let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "What's wrong?" he repeated. "I went looking for poetry and ended up stuck in dull, ordinary prose. Flat, lifeless, and disappointing. Tell me, Tiburcio, who convinced me to walk down Rua da Quitanda? What cruel joke of fate led me there?" He paused, his voice softening, as if remembering something painful. "I thought I was chasing beauty, something noble and pure. But all I found was mediocrity. Worse than that, commonness dressed up as something grand." Tiburcio leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "You're speaking in riddles again," he said. "What happened on Rua da Quitanda that's got you so worked up?" Alfredo looked at him, his face pale and his eyes heavy with regret. "Let's just say," he replied slowly, "that some dreams are better left unchased. Some paths lead nowhere but back to yourself, and you don't always like what you find."
Thank you for listening so far. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like our channel and click the bell to be notified whenever a new book is read. Have you heard of Machado de Assis? Machado de Assis, born in Rio de Janeiro in 1839, is considered one of the greatest writers in Brazilian literature and a master of psychological realism. He was a novelist, poet, playwright, and short story writer whose works explore the complexities of human behavior with irony, subtlety, and deep introspection. Among his most famous novels are Dom Casmurro, which questions truth and memory, and the posthumous memoirs of Brás Cubas, a satirical narrative told by a deceased man. Machado's literature often reflects the contradictions of Brazilian society, addressing issues like race, class, power, and identity in a sophisticated yet accessible style. Despite being born into poverty and facing racial prejudice, Machado de Assis rose to become the president of the Brazilian Academy of Letters and a symbol of literary excellence. His sharp wit and profound observations about society and the human soul make his works timeless and universally relevant. Today, he is recognized not only as a Brazilian icon, but also as a world-class author whose legacy continues to influence generations of writers and thinkers. Machado de Assis shows us that literature can be both elegant and critical, intimate and universal, humorous and profound. His stories remain as powerful and thought-provoking today as they were more than a century ago. Machado is a treasure of world literature, and through his voice, we discover the infinite layers of the human experience.